There were a couple of clients, and I was amazed at their thought, or actually their lack of thought. One was a man nearing the end of his 50s, worried about the fact that he would be homeless as soon as he retired from the company which had actually given him a house to live until he worked for them. And I asked him a very simple question. I asked, didn't you realize that once you retired from the company, you would be homeless? And he surprised me with his answer, no, Varkha, it didn't occur to me. In the second example, I had someone who came in quite distraught because his hands were pretty much full. He had invited a pet into his house, not realizing that he would be possibly strapped with resources, a little less money to spend on himself, and of course, the dependency of the pet for the next 12-15 years. Both, according to me, had no foresight and had not realized the consequences of their actions. In the first, the man had not realized the consequences of his inaction. Welcome. Welcome to today's episode of how not to get yourself into trouble. What I thought was common sense was actually not that common. And I have a few pointers here for all of us to use before we decide to do anything. First, float on the river of time. It is important for us to project into the future. Living only in the present may not be such a wise thing to do. In fact, I suggest live approximately 18 months ahead, knowing what possibly your life would be like. Had this gentleman, who was going to be nearing retirement, understood and floated on the river of time and visualized where he would be living at the age of 60, maybe he would have done very differently. Had the gentleman who introduced a pet into his house asked himself about what were the responsibilities that were going to accrue to him as life went on, maybe he wouldn't have got a pet. What were the expenses? Did he have to educate his children? Were there old parents that he would have to manage and take care of? If these questions were asked knowing that in the next 18 months to the next 2 years, these were the possibilities that would unfold, maybe his choices would be very different. So, do float on the river of time and project where you are likely to be. Accordingly, you may be surprised that the decisions you would have otherwise taken in the present may actually not be the most sensible ones. 2. A lot of us don't do things to avoid anxiety, and a lot of us also impulsively act to ward off anxiety. In the first case, I believe the man was too anxious to think about what he needed to do to plan to get himself his own house, and behaving like an ostrich, not wanting to think about it, made him safe, albeit in a very poor way. Now, when retirement was around the corner, there was no plan in place about where he would stay. But in the second case of the pet being introduced, maybe this was an impulsive act. Maybe the person who brought in the pet brought it in for very wrong reasons. What do I mean? Many a times, people have poor relationships at home, there's tension, discontentment, and what have you. And they believe that the only way to bond with everyone is to be able to introduce a pet. Had he actually worked on what mattered and alleviated the relationship trouble, maybe he wouldn't have made the choice of having a pet. The third aspect is concentrate on what really matters. Do not completely distract yourselves with irrelevant things, and do prepare, because I do believe to be forewarned is to be forearmed. So these 3 facets. Float on the river of time. Ask yourself if you're trying to avoid an emotion or impulsively trying to do something to distract yourself from a very threatening emotion which makes you then act very foolishly, and go to the bottom or ask yourself the reasons for why you do what you do. Prepare. It matters, and the future will often be able to guide you to live your present rather well. If you like what you hear, please do hit the like button, please do share my video, and of course, continue to write to me at varkha@varkhacholani.com. Till next week, it's goodbye and thank you.